Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome to Prepare, Respond, Recover, Protecting Your Assets Through a Disaster webinar. Glad you've all joined us today. This will be a fantastic discussion, but first I have just a few housekeeping items. The phone lines will be muted during today's session. Please submit any questions you have through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time during the session. If you're on a mobile device, you likely will have to tap the screen to get the Q&A bucket box to show up. The presenters will be answering your questions at the end of the presentation. The presentation is being recorded and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording tomorrow. So you'll be able to watch it again or share it with your colleagues. There are some interesting related assets up in the top right corner of your screen. So please feel free to take advantage of those. And then down in the bottom right corner, you can request a customized demo if you want to get more information on the solutions we're talking about here today. So without any further delay, I'll introduce our wonderful moderator, who is Raven Sykes. She's Strategic Enterprise Solutions Consultant here at Brightly. She's our moderator. She has a passion for empowering civic leaders and public sector professionals. She has been instrumental in pioneering cutting-edge solutions at Brightly for over 15 years, leaving an indelible mark in both education and government verticals. Her profound understanding of public service needs has forged her expertise in asset investment analysis and strategic planning, powerful tools that steer organizations towards success. Welcome, Raven. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tracy, and I'm excited as well for the opportunity to moderate today's discussion with Mark Stevens, who's my co-host and Chief Growth Officer at Withers Ravenel, to explore how your communities can take action to protect your assets before, during, and natural disasters, workforce disruptions, economic worries, and aging infrastructure. Mark brings 24 years of experience in public sector leadership, land development, and civil engineering, which gives him a deep understanding of the unique needs of Withers Ravenel public sector clients. Most recently, Mark was the city manager for New Bern in Craven County, North Carolina. For 7 years, he developed, executed, and implemented policy for the city. During this time, he led the city through 6 significant natural disasters. Today, he will share with us the best practices and lessons learned from these experiences. We're very pleased to have Mark with us today to share his knowledge and experience with us. So Mark, before we dive in, can you share with us a little bit about your experience with natural disasters?
Sure, thanks, Raven, and thank you for the awesome introduction. You definitely promote me well. First off, let me preface my experience as not holistic for all disasters. I can speak primarily from the natural disasters of hurricanes and the impacts associated with them. So I guess that almost qualifies me to say that I slept in a Holiday Inn Select last night. But appreciate that great interview. Most of my experience comes from, like I said, hurricanes and impacts associated with them, with wind-driven impacts, tremendous amounts of vegetative and demolition debris, flooding of rivers, canals, storm surge backing up into the sounds of eastern North Carolina, significant rainfall events that created a tremendous amount of inland flooding over my course of time in New Bern as both a director of public works and a city manager. What's interesting is my first experience with the impacts of hurricanes dates all the way back to Hurricane Hugo in 1989. I'm not sure how many of our people that are on the call here can attest to being and experiencing the impacts of Hurricane Hugo, but I was 13 at the time. I can remember being awoken in the middle of the night. My mom was screaming because a large tree had crashed down on our house just right over my bedroom, and luckily for us, the tree was fairly close to the house. It did mess up some things structurally to the house, but didn't come crashing through like you see in some cases. So I lived to survive that event, but it certainly was a wake-up call and kind of gave us our my first introduction to the impacts that storms can have. And what's interesting is I lived in the foothills of North Carolina in a small town called Hickory, North Carolina. It's about a population of, at that time, probably 35,000 people. It's probably about 50,000 now. And we're 250 miles inland from any coast. So the impacts of a hurricane that far inland were very uncommon. And Hugo came up through Charleston and went through Charlotte and came up through Hickory and really slammed us pretty hard when we woke up that morning. I mean, it was just a tremendous amount of trees down around our houses. We kind of lived in the woods. And we spent weeks cutting trees and digging out of that over a period of weeks and trying to get ourselves restored back. But it was kind of my first indoctrination of how severe storms can be as a young child. Moving on to my professional career, my first experience with disaster events was while I was working for the city of New Bern as Director of Public Works. I just started my role in January of 2011, so I was kind of hyper focused on getting to know my people, the process, the organization, what they did on their day-to-day basis, and things like that. And 7 months into my tenure there, along comes a storm called Hurricane Irene, and it was a pretty significant event. There hadn't been one that hit our area in New Bern for probably a good 8 or 10 years, I guess, maybe a little less. I think it was 2005 or 6 when they had Floyd and a bunch of other ones that came through and caused a lot of damage. But significant vegetative debris experience, some flooding that we saw there. I think it was about 8 feet of storm surge coming up the Neuse River into New Bern and caused some significant impacts in that area. After Irene, I went on to experience 5 other named events that significantly impacted our region. There were some in between those, but we had, and all of those were as a city manager in 2000, when I became city manager in 2014. And those were Matthew in 2016, Florence 2018, which was probably our worst, Michael, which followed up Hurricane Florence about a month later, I think it was, Dorian in 2019, and the hurricane named Isaias, which most people couldn't pronounce, so we called it the hurricane that shall go unnamed in 2020. That was the last storm that I dealt with as a city manager in New Bern. So as you can tell, I've had my share of fun with disasters and recovery from them, each of them being unique in their own way, and each of them I came away with a better understanding of how better to respond to natural disasters in my community. I know that there's some people on the call here. I saw somebody there, I think it was from the city of Wilmington, myself and my mayor and Bill Sappho, the mayor of Wilmington, and the mayor of Surf City, Doug Medlin, and a couple others at the time. We actually went to Washington, D.C. to try to keep the focus on our community through our representatives post-Hurricane Florence, which was, like I said, one of the most impactful storms. As you can see in some of the pictures here, moving from top left around the circle there, kind of clockwise, the one in the top left, that's 2 of my electric crew workers wading through. Hopefully nobody from OSHA is on the call because he's holding a chainsaw above his head as he's wading through some flood waters because they were trying to get some branches and limbs off of some power lines to try to restore some power. And then you can see that's the City Hall of New Bern there in the center. You can see how significant the rainfall was at that particular point. We did call in the National Guard. As you can see, there were some rescues going on in our area. We had a significant presence from them. We had to call in some mutual aid for that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then in the bottom left, we actually had a structure fire during the event. Even though we told people to evacuate, somebody decided to stay. They had they had a generator on their back deck, which was made of wood, and the gasoline kind of got out of the generator as he was filling it up, caught the deck on fire, burnt their entire house down, and our fire department was out there fighting it during the middle of a hurricane with about 3 or 4 feet of water. That water has actually gone down because you can see there's no structure left, but the water had actually receded quite a bit from what it was when our guys were out there trying to fight the fire. But you deal with a lot, and a lot of decisions, a lot of quick snap decisions have to be made, and you always have to keep that safety and thing in mind. So that's kind of my experience, and I'm happy to dive into a little bit further, but that's kind of a brief overview of some of the fun times that I've had with natural disasters over the years.
And Mark, just a quick follow-up to that. You mentioned that you served in a couple of different roles in managing the natural disasters, one being the director of public works and one being a city manager. So could you speak, I guess, having that perspective as a director of public works and how that maybe helped in the city manager, your role?
Sure. Well, you know, Irene, like I said, was kind of a indoctrination in my community. You know, public works was kind of the catch-all. We had our own electric department. We had our own water and sewer department. You know, they're very specific. They're dealing with conveyance of water and sewer and lines. They're dealing with ensuring that the power stays on. But when it comes to public works, you're kind of the catch-all if it doesn't fit into another category. You know, you've got your fire that does their thing, police does their thing, but you know, when it comes to the flooding, when it comes to you know, the pavement, roads needing to be blocked off, to debris management and removal, and to you know, roofs and structures. And I mean, I had even had the insurance was in for all of our buildings and structures. I was managing the actual insurance for all of those losses. And so it was kind of a catch-all. And so it really afforded me great experience in understanding a huge breadth of kind of operations of a municipality that were outside of like public safety or specific things like water and sewer. But my past experience I was an assistant public works director in Statesville, and we had water sewer conveyance, and both of those entities, both New Bern and Statesville, were electric utilities. So I was pretty familiar with working with electric utilities as well. So, and I'll talk about, you know, some of the key the key components of disaster here in a little bit as we get into some of our questions. But, you know, having that breadth was really helpful in understanding some of the things that needed to be done. But the issue, again, it's just my infancy in my career at New Bern when the first disaster hit, but it really opened my eyes to some things that needed to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And Mark, based on those experiences, we're going to pivot to some of the mobilizing the people, process, and technology. So with that in mind, how did you prioritize people, process, and technology heading into a disaster?
Sure. Well, you know, the big key word these days is resilience, you know, and I don't even know that the word had been born at that point. In 2011, I think maybe it was starting to kind of come to head, but now it's a common term in the emergency management world and in community planning and emergency preparedness is resilience. And resiliency begins with preparedness. You know, coming into New Bern, experiencing Irene, I could tell that we were not very prepared the way I would like it to be, maybe the way they used to do things. We hear that a lot within organizations that we join, and this is the way we've always done it. Well, that was never an answer for me. I really hated that answer. I abhorred that answer. And first thing I would say, well, there's a different way to do it. And have you explored that? And I mean, they might have been doing it for 20 some years. And so I recognized very quickly that I was going to do my best to fix that. We were not well prepared to address the large scale impacts of disasters. Much of this was due to our lack of process and technology, data collection, pre-disaster procurement, lack of understanding of our needs for assistance with documenting and restoring the millions of dollars that were spent by our organization to recover from the losses. I mean, a lot of that stuff kind of come to head. In my case, you know, prior to Irene, you know, I was focused on understanding this organization, and many would say, hey, anytime you take a new role, you know, or a new post, you know, you don't want to really make a whole lot of changes in the first 6 months. You want to see how it's operating. They may have some better processes than you do or had from your previous organizations, but it's an opportunity for you to learn where some of the lacking areas are. And that's kind of what I did and understood that our current state of affairs within the organization, you know, we needed some large scale changes to occur. And again, I did not really have during that time period to review and become familiar with our recovery and response plan for those major disasters. And it took a while. It probably cost our taxpayers a lot of money. Some things might have been left on the table. There could have been, I mean, I know there was a ton of inefficiencies and lack of understanding about, the people in the process and the roles and things that each person played, how to communicate well during a disaster, things like that. We had a very archaic way of collecting our data. A lot of people back in those days were coming into technology unfamiliar with it. They did not like the tech. Some people weren't accepting of technology. We still have some of those today, actually, in organizations. But data was becoming a very important part of a community, and the lack of data really hurt us. We had paper files and manila folders, and our work order system. Get this. Our work order system during that time consisted of carbon copy tickets that got put in each division head's box to be completed during that time. I felt like I was Noah going up on the mountain to get God to tell me, to inscribe it into these tablets of stone so that I could go down and tell people what to do. So it really opened my eyes to the need of having some integrated data and technology within our organization so that we could properly manage and address events and even our day-to-day. I'm not talking about disasters. I'm just talking day-to-day work order systems, day-to-day operations. It was just so archaic, and some of the things that I noticed that really, really needed some improvement. Post-Irene, I became focused on ensuring our department was prepared as much as possible for any kind of future event that we had, and this ultimately transferred and transitioned into my role as the city manager in the preparation phase. And we talk about being prepared for these storms. And to me, there's three primary focuses. You've got the process, you've got the people, and then you've got the technology. So, establishing well-defined disaster response and recovery processes is paramount. It's to ensure our efficiency and effectiveness in our operations during and even after the event. You need to take into account, what would happen if you lost any of the 7 primary lifelines that I mentioned previously that I kind of talk about. Those 7 primary lifelines, you've got food, water, safety, security, / in between those, communications, fuel, energy, and housing. And those are the 7 lifelines that you have. And if you lose any of those, it becomes critical for you to restore that. And we experienced a lot of those throughout the disasters in various ways. We always lost power. Anytime you're dealing with a major storm, major wind event, you're going to have trees on line. Florence, for example, we lost pretty much about 96% of our electric system that went offline. We had a few little areas that were close to substations that got lucky and didn't lose power, but most of our system had some kind of damage, and we had lost most of that. Learned a little bit of our lesson along the way. Irene, it took sometimes a week or 2 to get everybody restored, and of course people were just clamoring, raising hell about all that, and we had most of our system up within 4 days after Hurricane Florence, and that's a pretty strong improvement from where we were, and that was a significant amount of damage. So, again, you need to take into account any of those loss of primary lifelines. Communications was a big one in Puerto Rico. I was in a conference session this past week. Brock Long, former FEMA administrator, he's an app grad, which I got my master's in public administration at Appalachian, and I know Brock well, and he was talking about during Puerto Rico that was one of the major impacts that heated the response and improvements in Puerto Rico was just a lack of communications. So all of those are very critical, all of those 7 ones, and you really need to focus on your preparedness to address each one of those if you have a loss or if you have a disruption in the supply chain or supply line. Wilmington, North Carolina, during Hurricane Florence was cut off from all the major highways and supply chain lines that was able to get resources into their community. Same thing with New Bern in eastern North Carolina whenever Hurricane Florence came along. And that was primarily due to flooding. I-40 was flooded, 17 was flooded. I mean, we had flooding everywhere, and it was hard to get the resources needed. I think they were bringing things in from helicopters. So regarding the process, the organization that you work for, you're not the first to experience a disaster, and you don't have to create a way to respond from that. This has been experienced over and over and over by many different governments across our nation and in the world, for that fact. Firstly, I would recommend that if you need to get some resources and you need to find a path to get started, go to the ready.gov site from FEMA. They have a tremendous amount of data, toolkits, preparedness checklists, social media toolkits regarding how to communicate and how to effectively get preparedness documents out, or how to communicate during storms. There's a wealth of information there that exists to better prepare your community for disasters. Secondly, work closely with your emergency management professionals, your organizations at the state and local levels. I work for a municipality. Craven County was the county that ran. They had an emergency manager, emergency management individual professional that worked within the organization. And most of in North Carolina, the way it's structured, those counties, they report up to the state level during these events, and they're communicating with the state EOC. And then you got the county EOC. We had our own EOC because we had a lot of our own resources and things that we needed to operate with, and especially with the electric utility, which the county didn't really have as much of an interest in that, but it was very important to our community. So each community is going to be a little bit different, but it's important to maintain those relationships. And thirdly, procure your vendors, contractors, consultants ahead of time. With the most stringent procurement bidding rules and procedures in place, whether that's the CFR, federal regulations, if that's the state regulations, or local, because that comes down to ensuring that FEMA has ensured that you procure those contracts appropriately. So that's important. I call these blue sky contracts because the best time to do those are whenever the skies are blue and it's really pretty outside and you're not in the middle of a disaster, or you're not trying to recover from a disaster. You need to have these things in place. On-call engineering contracts, debris management contracts, different contracts to procure the needs for the community lifelines. What are you going to do if you have week-long outages and your grocery stores and your fuel stations are impacted? They can't get fuel to put in generators. The generators aren't running, so then the refrigerated items are going bad. There's all kinds of things that are impacted whenever you think about that, as far as supply chains on food and water and housing. Do you have contracts for bottled water if you need it? If you needed to bring those in, if you needed to drop a hat and say, hey, somebody in Indiana, send us 14 truckloads of water. Because we need that. Those are all important things to procure as much as possible ahead of time. Different power companies, having them come in, roll in, set up, stage up early on. You see, oftentimes prior to a hurricane or disaster event, you'll see trucks upon trucks going down the interstates that are power companies staging up for different municipalities or different co-ops or different energy providers like Duke or Progress or some of the others. So those are all important to procure and get done ahead of time. And finally, develop clear plans, procedures, and communication protocols. That's so critical in everything that you're doing in your disaster recovery. So regarding people, you need to ensure that the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined and everyone understands their functions. Disaster response, and in that disaster response and recovery, you need to train and educate your personnel on disaster preparedness. They offer a ton of ICS courses, 100, 200, 400. I mean, it goes up all the way up into the 1500s or more. I know that we required a minimum depending on the level of the individuals that were within our organization, whether they took 100, 200 only, or whether they took 100, 200, 400, 700, 800. Just depending on the level of which the person was operating from and their role that they had in the incident command. Finally, conduct some drills. Regarding people, conduct drills. You've got to do exercise. You got to practice. You don't get good at anything unless you practice. And so there was a lot of times where we would have these smaller storms, not the 5 that I listed, but some of these other events where we would use those as practice opportunities. We would use those as opportunities to kind of go through our procedures. What do we do if, put together an EOC? How quickly can we put it up? How quickly can we, get it operating, get it hot? Some will have, some organizations have warm EOCs. That's where, they're pretty much ready to go. Everything's operating. You just got to bring in the people and start them. Hot means you're operating fully. Cold means that it's a shell of a building and you've got to really put some time in to bring it up to a full EOC status. So conduct those drills, understand where your weaknesses are, and improve upon those through those practice opportunities. And then clear chain of command. A lot of that's covered in the ICS stuff, the decision making across the different crisis, and then ultimately that training and going through those exercises better prepares you to understand who's got what role, what their role is, what their responsibilities are, who reports to who. So all of that is really important when you're talking about people. And finally, technology. Gosh, invest, as you see here, and I'll get into kind of the work order system, and we saw that was one of the big breakdowns in our system. I talked about the NOAA going up and having the tablets chiseled in the stone. We had a very, very weak work order system and technology. So you got to invest in the necessary technology and infrastructure to support your disaster preparedness efforts. This may include setting up communication systems, data backups, recovery solutions, emergency notification systems. Code Red is a big one here in North Carolina that you can use that puts out alerts to your entire community. And again, work order systems. Brightly's got one here that's shown on your screen. This is a Asset Essentials, which is great for taking inventory of your assets, understanding what all assets you have, what the condition of those are, what the maintenance logs are, knowing and understanding what you have so that when they get damaged, you know what the pre-disaster condition was. You can prove that you were working on them and that you were actually maintaining those. And obviously, when they get damaged in the storm, it makes your work a lot easier in documenting all the things that you have done so that you can speed up the process and recovery. That was one of our, like I said, this was one of our largest breakdowns during Irene. We just did not have a good work order inventory system. We didn't know what all the assets were out there. People have them in little black logs about, when they had worked on this. They had to go back for black log after black log after black log of little notebooks of trying to find out the last time they maintained something or did some improvements on something. So it was very, very laborious to try to get the information needed so that we could submit the documentation to prove that we were maintaining this and that we were doing it appropriately. And here's the records that we have to show it, so that we could actually get the funding or the grant resources back from FEMA to restore that. So as you can see here, a great opportunity here where you can take information, plug it in. It's data that can be used by anybody that comes and goes in your organization. And it's a great way to issue out work orders when things are done, if something needs to be worked on. And quite frankly, building upon your capital improvement plan. I mean, gosh, if you know what the future holds in the improvements you need to do to your assets, then you can build capital improvement plans outside of disasters, and work in those systems to try to develop those plans and set your financials up for the next year. It's important to figure out ways to collect and safely store all of this. Obviously, that's important. You're going to have disaster events that impact things. Regularly scheduled maintenance, digital tools, enhancing your data accessibility, efficiency, collaboration, and I think it's paramount for you to have good data, good access, and understand what you own and what you've got to maintain and keep records of, because you certainly don't want to leave money on the table, because once the disaster's over and your window of opportunity to reimburse yourselves for those kind of things, if you don't know what your assets are and then you come back and find something's damaged, then you're just out of luck. That's not a good place to be. It's not a good position to put your taxpayers in.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. That was a wealth of great information and talking about making sure there's clear direction around roles and what people will be expected to do during these disasters, building good habits, leveraging technology to make sure your processes are being adhered to. So really great points. That leads us into our first poll for the audience. We're going to get some participation. And so the first poll question we are going to present is very simple, yes or no. Do you have a system for recording maintenance activities and its impact on the infrastructure condition? And so as you respond to that, we'll definitely take that into consideration as we get into some of the other elements of our conversation, but really, really great beneficial information, Mark, you just shared there. So, and it looks like most of you have responded. So it looks like it's a mixed 50% replied yes, and 50% of you said you do not have a maintenance system. So with that in mind, we're going to kind of shift into the second portion of our conversation, Mark, and that is really going to consist of based on your experience, what are the actions you recommend while a storm or a natural disaster is unfolding that can be taken to minimize risk of damages, injury, and on a more serious note, seen some of the headlines more recently with the wildfires in Hawaii and the impact of that. So just give us some of your things that can be done while that's unfolding.
Sure. Well, one of the key points, you've got to coordinate with your other governmental agencies. I will tell you that in and I'm going to speak specifically more from Hurricane Florence. As you can see, that top left picture that's on your screen there, that was a community, low-lying community within New Bern. We had 13 feet of storm related surge within our community, and it impacted this community significantly. The top part of that picture up there, this is a recreation facility we had called Stanley White Recreation Center, and this is probably after a pretty good amount of water had receded at that point, but there's tons of homes around this particular area that were impacted. And we spent a lot of time prior to this storm as it was coming in, hey, you guys need to consider evacuating. And a lot of times it goes on deaf ears. And then we continue to send out information. Hey, looks like the storm's getting worse. You need to evacuate. Eventually, we got to the point where the day before the storm, we actually had a activity bus, 2 activity buses going through these communities that we knew were low-lying areas, begging people door to door with lights and sirens, fire and police right behind the activity bus, offering to take these people and get them out of these communities, these low-lying areas, because people were still refusing to evacuate. You can't make people evacuate. Even though it's a mandatory evacuation, you can't make people evacuate. So that was an issue. We ended up probably, I think it was 700 or 800 water rescues during Hurricane Florence. During the middle of this storm, we were cutting people out of roofs, cutting the roofs off of houses to try to get people who were stuck in attics. We had the Cajun Navy had come up from Louisiana and some places down there, and we had the National Guard from that one picture I remember you showed earlier. They were going around rescuing people in some of those large tire vehicles that they have, fifth wheels, and going around just trying to rescue people all over our community. So, we fortunately did not, even though we had to do 800 water rescues, did not have a single loss of life during the event. But that is not the case in a lot of disasters. There was a disaster, Florence did have deaths. We didn't have any in New Bern. They were other places where they occur. But it's difficult when you start having to make decisions, not necessarily just for your community, but I'm sitting here having to make a decision whether or not I'm going to send my firemen out to rescue somebody that we knew had been warned and had been knocked on the door and everything else, that you need to get out. This is an extremely dangerous event. The flooding is going to get bad, and they refuse to leave. So it's a difficult call. We had, again, I talk about mutual aid contracts and making sure and do those in blue sky. Security after an event, when all of this stuff is damaged, people have to leave their homes, all their belongings, so forth and so on. Unfortunately, you've got some really bad people in the world that come in and start looting in these situations, and securing and having mutual aid contracts for police departments across the state to come in. We had people from Gastonia, people from Raleigh, we had all kinds of different relationships that we had with people coming in to help ensure security and safety within our community. And we quarantined certain areas of air, that were severely damaged because we knew that there's going to be people come in to take advantage of that. And that's very unfortunate, but it's so much part of the preparedness. But during the event, you've got to make the decisions whether to send people out to rescue. You've got to make the decisions whether or not to call in the mutual aid. And so making sure to try to minimize, again, the risk and the damage and the injury and the loss of life, those are important decisions that you've got to make and within your community. Having a central place for shelter, access to food for people that have lost the ability to do so, those are important as well. Communicating where opportunities are, what's open, who still has power, who still has fuel. Granted, it creates a madhouse. The lines get long at certain gas stations that have fuel and they have power to be able to do that. But it's important to be able to communicate that. But communication challenges and the use of technology are great for record keeping during an event. So during Hurricane Florence and all the other after Irene, instead of doing the old work order hand-me-down paper system, we started having it documented in data and through our work order system. And that way guys could be out in the field, they get their work orders, they're out there in the field, they move on from the next item to the next item, or they have a damaged asset. They can actually take condition of that asset while they're out there in the field and it's damaged, and then or shut down a street, whatever it may be. Those are opportunities where you have accurate documentation of the damage that's happening, so that it eases your ability to restore and actually get refunded through the FEMA process of submitting those for post-disaster restoration back to pre-disaster conditions. So it's such an important, vital part of that during the process. As you can see here, this is an example. I mean, this is probably a blue sky opportunity here, but you've got potholes, you've got water main breaks, you've got things that you're tracking, and this may be over time, within this work order system here, but it can be used for disaster events too, where you have documentation, videos, pictures that are linked to specific segments within your GIS system or whatever, your work order system, to where you can show maintenance logs. And post-disaster, you see, oh, we've got 3 new potholes because a subgrade's been damaged on this road. So we could probably get refunded to restore some of this pavement or some of this subgrade that's on this street. Or, we had a sewer line that had an issue. There was caving in of the pavement, which it was due to surcharge within the sewer system because of water infiltrating in and other places that caused this washout. That was a disaster-related event, which ultimately could cause for an opportunity to mitigate that in the future post-disaster. So work order systems are great. The technology's there. You're able to work from it during the event, pre the event, post the event, and it just speeds up the process of which you can restore your community back to its pre-disaster condition.
Thank you, Mark. All great points. You mentioned a few things, just being able to build those habits in so that in the midst of a storm or post-storm, your team is already acclimated to capturing data, speeding up the process for reimbursement so that that information is accurate, and the taxpayer at the end of the day is not having to foot that bill or that cost being wasted. So that's going to lead to our second. We have a 2-part poll question that we're going to present. And again, this question, the first one is going to be around, do you have a comprehensive inventory of your community's assets? And it's just yes or no. So while you're responding to that, Mark, you brought up some great points and knowing beforehand what the pre-disaster condition is, so that you can more accurately paint the picture for FEMA and other agencies, your insurance companies, to better explain why that investment is necessary and the funds that are needed. And so it looks like most of you have responded. So, based on the results, it looks like a third of you responded that you do currently have a comprehensive list. And then about 2/3 of the group responded that you do not. So with that in mind, I'm going to pivot to the second part of that 2-poll question is, what software or medium do you use to store these inventories? And so you'll see that there are some responses, one being GIS, paper records. Mark brought that up in terms of some of the archaic nature of where the city was prior. And then, of course, you may have an asset management software. You may also be using your work order system, or anything that we haven't mentioned, you can select other for that response. And so while we're waiting on you respond to that, Mark, I know we talked a little bit prior to this and how you really saw the value of having a system, you know, after you've kind of gone through this one time. Maybe can you talk about some of the things that you did to get your team acclimated, you know, with technology, because that's always, you know, a hurdle, change management. And you've already mentioned there are people who embrace technology, those who don't.
Yeah, sure. Well, the embracing the technology is the hardest one, because you're always going to have folks that just do not want to change how they've done things. It goes back to the "Who Moved My Cheese" theory. I think if anybody's read that book, I can't remember the guy that was the author of it, but anyways, you know, you had him and Hall, and then you had the two mice, and the mice ran off because their cheese moved, and you had the other ones that just refused to change. They didn't want to do it. So you're always going to have those that just refuse change. And of course, at that point, you've got to decide, are they in the right role? Do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do it? You know, are they right people in the right seat? That's a decision that you've got to make as a leader of your organization, especially if you're looking to move it to a different phase and era. But you know, you've got to start with the training. You got to start with the people. You've got to, you know, find out their willingness to do so, and then you've got to train them. They're going to have some issues. There's always going to be hiccups. The other part of it is you've got to take, you know, what data, what records you have that are in the paper form or in some other form, and get it into a digital format. Scanning documents is a tremendous thing for an intern to do, you know, or finding somebody that's willing to volunteer within your organization. Say, we need all this stuff scanned. We need it, you know, properly fold, you know, in the proper folders, documented correctly, put in the right spots. You know, this particular asset, this particular street, whatever it is, maintenance logs, whatever. So important to get all that, and that's a lot of work. It takes a ton of time to do that. You've got to have somebody that's going to manage it within your organization. Obviously, if they're going to do it themselves, that's great, because they're going to have a lot more familiarity. But if it's somebody that's volunteering an intern, you're going to have somebody that's going to have some oversight over that, and somebody's going to have to own it. You got to have somebody's neck to wring if it doesn't turn out right? So, you know, that's the important parts. You know, you've got to work on the people, and then you've got to work on actually getting a base to start with. But you got to start somewhere, and if you don't start somewhere, then you're going to constantly be behind the 8 ball when it comes to disaster events or your asset maintenance records and taking care of your community's assets.
Absolutely, yeah. Starting where they are today, and then kind of build on that gradually, so that, as you stated wonderfully, where you're not in the midst of a disaster, and then you're trying to, you know, get people to acclimate. So
it's like going and talking. It's like going and talking to a financial advisor, Raven. You know, a financial advisor is like, you know what? You may not have a lot of money now saved up in the bank, but you got to start somewhere, and just start now. You know, you got to do something. You know what I'm saying? You just can't continue to wait. So get it rolling, and in the end, you'll catch up at some point. It'll be a huge benefit to your community.
Awesome. Well, we're going to move into a little bit more of the post-disaster. You've hit on some of these key points already, but I just wanted to make sure we touched on this. What are some of the critical things that you see during the recovery phase? And just thinking about communication, and then also dispatching your team to help get back online as quickly as possible.
Sure. You know, communication, dispatching our teams, cleaning up repairs. You know, once that storm's gone, you've got weeks of cleanup that's necessary. And I'll give you an experience that we had. So Irene, very bad storm, but not nearly as bad as Florence. And it took us a long time to recover from Irene. A lot of it was because we were trying to do stuff ourselves. We did not procure a lot of great debris contracts prior to. We should have. We did some post, but to help us out, but it wasn't to the level that we needed to be. And it really impacted the speed of which our recovery was done. It created worrisome things on there's a lot of sleepless nights I had because, if it wasn't done correctly based on the CFR regulations of FEMA, then, you lose the potential funding reimbursement. Lots of sleepless nights on whether or not we're doing it the correct way. So get all that stuff done beforehand. There was a huge difference, a notable difference between that and Florence. Florence was the worst storm that we dealt with in 2018. Tremendous impacts to the New Bern area. I told my public works director, we were sitting in the EOC, and it happened. I can't remember the exact dates now, but it was the early part of September, and we always have the Mum Fest festival. It was always the latter part or the first part of October. It was a month later. And I told him, I said, by gosh, we are going to have this place cleaned up, and we're going to have that festival, because that festival is going to be critical for our community. They're going to need a break. They're going to want some positive to come out of this after such a bad disaster. And they busted their tails. We had great contracts in place. The efficiencies were there. We knew what we needed to do. And we had that place cleaned up and had a festival of 100,000 people at that Mum Fest. And it was 4 weeks later. And it was tremendous impacts that we had with our group, and noticeable difference because we had good data. We knew where stuff was. We had access to resources. We had a contract set in place. And it just made such a huge difference. On the backside of that, because we had some contracts in place, it made a huge difference in the timeliness of our submissions to get reimbursed. Timely submissions of reimbursement are critical anytime you're dealing with the disasters, because all of that money is coming out of your fund balance, out of your organization to start with. It is massive amounts of money. I'd hate to know what the number was, but it was a pretty large number. I'm talking in the $10 to $20 million range that we were coming out of pocket to actually recover from this. And that's money that your organization, your community, your city taxpayers are eating at that time until you can show that you've properly documented and that you've had damage, and you can justify that reimbursement from them. And so to have all the data, have all the assets in place, and know what their conditions are, and being able to submit that stuff timely, it allowed us to get our reimbursement back a lot faster on a lot of things. It also allowed us to position ourselves better to get funding on things that we didn't even know about. And so that was super important. So strong fund balances, you're going to have to carry that weight for a while and make sure that you've got the data and everything in place so that you can accurately and aggressively get your funding back through the FEMA reimbursement process.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Great points. We're going to move into our last poll question for the group today. And this one is going to focus on your point about fund balances. So this poll question, what percentage of fund balances does your community maintain to address disasters and unforeseen expenses? So you can see a couple of different options there, ranging from 0 to 10%. Maybe you budget for 10 to 20% and on up. So if you take a moment there to respond to that, and we'll capture the results on that. But Mark, while that's being filled out, just curious in terms of your experience and going through these different disasters, is there sort of a best practice or a certain range within having a fund balance that seems to work best? Obviously, the more you have, the better. But
sure. Yeah. So in every state, every location is different. North Carolina, they have a local government commission, and that requires, they do audits every year. They require municipalities to maintain a certain fund balance percentage. I think the minimum is 7 or 8% typically of your typical operations costs, which is very low. When I joined New Bern, they had actually got the big nasty gram letter from the LGC that their fund balance was too low. There were some things going on. They weren't making decisions appropriately. And actually the LGC can come in and in North Carolina, can come in and take over a municipality if they're not properly maintaining their financials and the fund balance to support the services that they need to provide to a community. we were at that level, less than that, minimum requirement. And we had made a point that we were going to try to improve that. And I'm happy to say that whenever I left there, I think it was somewhere around 45%. It bounced back and forth between year over year. But, we tried to maintain a pretty healthy fund balance because if we didn't, it severely impacts your ability as a municipality to operate and function appropriately. And keep in mind, all of this money is expended to get your community. So let's say your electric utility experiences tremendous amounts of losses and you've got to procure and buy all of these assets to be able to get your electric system back up. You're carrying the weight of that cost until you can actually submit that and get the reimbursement back from FEMA. So FEMA is a grant program. I mean, it literally is. And you've got to prove that you followed all the rules and procedures in order for you to get that back. So I would urge and encourage people to number one, you've got to understand the assets that you own, what the potential loss is that you could experience, what your higher risk factors, and you need to really set those aside to understand, okay, well, here's our assets, here's how much potential risk that we have in losing, and then here's our cost to actually recover from the storm through contractual, whatever those may be, whether that's debris, whether that's vegetative, or if it's demolition debris, or if it's contractual in nature on call engineering services or whatever it may be. And then you got your own personnel that you got to maintain costs on, because you've got to have a tremendous amount of overtime for them working hours in the EOC and restoring your community back. So you really need to factor in all three of those things to determine what an adequate fund balance policy that you should get adopted. I would recommend that you get adopted by the board, because then it kind of puts a little bit of teeth, puts a little fire under them to say, you know what, if it drops below this, it's our responsibility to ensure that we're bringing in the revenue to do that. And that may require, an increase in the tax rate, or it may require, some other cut or of expenditure of some sort, or delay in some program that you want to do, whatever it may be. So in the end, you've got to be prepared financially to meet the demands of any kind of disaster event that you're going to have and be faced with your community. So that's some of the recommendations that I would have.
Awesome. Well, we got just a few minutes remaining. Mark, just before we close out, any final thoughts that you want to leave with us?
Yeah, just, emphasis on process, people and technology. Know what your documentation is. Make sure you've got it documented. Make sure you understand what you own, what you maintain, all the records for it. Try to push your community to be as resilient as possible. Where you did have damage, what's the way in which you can improve that in the future so that you don't have to deal with it? And what's a way that you can become more resilient to impacts of disaster type events? And again, I'm speaking strictly from my experience as hurricanes. I am not the expert in fire that you're dealing with in California or you're dealing with in Hawaii and things like that. But just from a hurricane standpoint, I can tell you from my experience that it's important for you to have the technology, have the data, have the information, be quick in what you do and effective in your recovery. It's so important. And then restart your day-to-day operations as quickly as possible. That's always important. And through the procurement of blue sky contracts, you can start that process earlier because you're bringing in that help, that assistance, whether that's on-call engineering services, whether that is, through debris management contracts and stuff like that. Have that stuff ready to go, because if you can enact it, it's good to go. Those people, they start ramping up their resources and show up. It's just so critical in the speed of which your recovery happens. And that way, when a disaster happens, you still got your day-to-day operations to do. You still got to do these things. These same calls are going to get in that you're getting daily, on top of all the other stuff that you got to do to recover from the storm. So don't delay. Get those contracts in place in the blue sky, and then that way you can get to your day-to-day operations better, because that's what your staff know and are good at.
Wonderful. Really, really appreciate it, Mark. You've shared a lot of great wisdom and information with us, so we really appreciate that. And Tracy, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Raven. Thank you both. Really fantastic information for our audience. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. You will get a email that links to this recording tomorrow so you can watch it. On the screen now, the 2023 FEMA BRIC program. This is a really important program for you all to pay attention to. There's grant funding for hazard mitigation efforts available. You need to get your plans in at specific deadlines. For North Carolina, that's coming up really quick on October 2nd. All of the states have varying dates. So check on your date. Also connect with Mary. She is really an expert in this place, and she can help you work through all of these efforts. I'll make sure that this information is available to you in the emails that follow this webinar as well. So thank you all for joining. Mark, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. And Raven, thank you for guiding us through the discussion. Have a fantastic day.
Brightly.